Hey, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Unleashed with Brian Collins. He is Brian Collins. I'm Greg Lal. I'm the host. And with our intrepid producer, Chris Judson. Thank you, Chris, for being here and making this possible. Okay, so you see on the board, which I have changed. By the way, I just was told by Brian, who's kind of the, he owns the podcast basically. Is that true, Chris? He's kind of the owner of the podcast. He told me he was going to, what's the word? Quadruple. He was going to quadruple my salary if I would change the board. So I did that, and that's effective immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So our topic today is dealing with doubt. But before we get into that at all, I want to have a brief follow-up on an episode, actually 2 episodes that we did on pets going to heaven. Because as I mentioned to Brian this morning, we have a new pet that has joined our family yesterday. It's a little multi-poo, if you know what that is. He's a cute. I have a picture.
Is that a Maltese poodle?
Perhaps. I don't know. Multi-poo is what I was told. And I just happen to have a picture here. I don't know if we can get this. Let me see. Where is it? Oh, he's so cute. There. Oh, can you see it? Chris, can they see it? I don't know. Isn't he cute? If you can see it. So he is so cute. His given name by his previous owner, he's 2 years old. And we're rehoming him, I guess is the proper word. We're rehoming him. Now, it's not a rescue, but it's an owner that's moving to Florida. They couldn't take the dog, so they need another home. So he now is in our home. And the reason I bring it up with respect to the podcast was because I think, Brian, you and I both agreed, tell me if I'm wrong, that the Bible is not clear as to whether pets go to heaven. But if they go to heaven on the basis of our relationship with the pet and with God. Is that roughly accurate without reliving the podcast? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So I get to rethinking it after last night, his first night in the home, because if Lucky is his name, or maybe Unlucky, if he goes to heaven on the basis of his relationship with me or with God, I'd say it's very questionable whether Lucky's going to make it to heaven. It was a difficult night.
Hey,
I'm not going to use the word hell. I just did. But I want to guard that word. It wasn't hell for sure, but I think it's possible that Lucky could go to hell and not heaven. That's all I'm saying. So any advice? I appeal to our vast listening audience and viewers. Help us, Suzanne and me, to figure out whether or not we should keep this pup. I know it's only one day, and it's a brand new environment. Blah blah blah, and he doesn't know anybody. I know. So, but it was very, very difficult. I did not get much sleep. That's my update. That's my follow-up. Brian, anything to say to that? No. Okay. So we better get into the podcast proper, which is dealing with doubt. And as always, Brian, oh no, we're not going to get into the podcast before Chris rolls the music. I can't wait to hear what this week is. Oh, I like it already. Little volume, I hope. Oh, there it is. What'd you call it? Bass? Drums. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chris. Who is that?
So just as a comment,
Yeah.
all of that was certainly electronic. So
you're talking about my follow-up
well,
with electronic?
well, no, because
Thank
you were making certain assertion about what makes music real, and so this kind of sound to me is reminiscent of the reboot of Tron with the about 2010 where Jeff Bridges reprises his role in this kind of fictional computer landscape. And I don't know if it actually was. It's not from Tron, is it? Yeah, but it has the same feel. And the artist that made Tron, this was 15 years ago, so it was before AI and these large language models and these kinds of things. But everything that they made was electronic, by which I mean they had they had originally the people that had made the things like the 808 drum had taken samples, which is small bites of real sounds. Supposedly one of the sounds was actually a basketball dribbling. And so the point is that it was real people playing instruments on a computer. And so my question to you is...
Whoa. They weren't playing real instruments
Absolutely
on
not.
the computer.
Well, no.
That's a contradiction in terms.
No, I mean they're sampled from real instruments. Sample is a technical term here. Sample means a small recording of a sound. So the most famous...
An actual recording of an actual instrument?
Yeah. And
or
then
electronically generated?
No.
Okay.
At least originally they were actually recordings that were then digitized. So again, the one I know the most about, which isn't a lot compared to some people, is the 808 drum kit, which is they recorded sounds in the real world, digitized them, and then put them onto this computer, which again you can play with a drum set. But again, your keyboard is the same thing, and so the keyboard. I remember my mom had, a keyboard back in the day, and there was 100 different voices. And so there was, a bunch of different strings and a bunch of different, whatever. And you could play, that it was like approximately whatever the key corresponded to on the piano. It was that key on the drum. And so theoretically you could make, and again, I never learned how to play the piano, so it was kind of a moot point. But the point is that like at least the 808 drums, some of them were samples from actual drums, but some of them were samples of a basketball bouncing, which sounds similar to a drum, but they've been incorporated into electronic music for nearly 50 years.
Just one correction. You said moot point. It's actually moo.
Yes, thank you,
moo
Ross.
Point, like the opinion of a cow.
Yes, thank you very much. I've never seen the episode, but I do know what you're talking about.
It's Joey's interpretation of So anyway,
it was Joey, not Ross.
Joey.
Yeah. Well, okay. They're both idiots in their own way. So a little bit before my time. Anyway, the point is that like the question that I still have for you is that like. If people are asking the question, if people are creating the music, even if it's a couple steps removed, is it still music? And that's why I keep pushing this point for you to think about.
Well, what is the point you're pushing? Just the question?
Well, because I want
you pushing an
opinion
or an answer.
I mean, I have my own opinion, but I genuinely want you to think about it because I don't think you have in the correct way.
All right. Before I answer that, little attribution here. What wonderful music was that?
That was Solid State Dreams, Random Access Mayhem OST by NahuPyrope.
I love their stuff. Nairo, yeah. Thank you, Chris. I haven't thought about it much.
Yeah, you haven't thought about it. That's my whole point.
Well, wait a minute.
No, but I'm just saying. I'm using you in the sense of that. Like, people will make opinions about things when they haven't really thought about what it is they're saying, and so I think your generation is very guilty of that.
Oh, that is what is that? Generation shaming?
Yes, 100%. And my generation already has a word for it. Or a phrase for it.
what, the generators of
No, okay, boomer.
okay. All right. Well, I was just about to just confess that no, I haven't thought about it. And hearing what you just said, I'm okay with what obviously is your opinion, and that is that anything qualifies for music. Culture kind of drifts and it becomes something different. It evolves, and I'm fine with that.
Well, but again, you know, I wouldn't even go that far, because you could just say that any noise is music, and I don't think that. I think there should be a purpose behind it.
So this is kind of a follow up to our AI episode.
It's related, yeah.
Would you say that the robot who now makes fries and hamburgers at McDonald's is a chef?
Is it still? I think, but the better question is I'm not talking about the production. I'm talking about, is it still a hamburger? In that analogy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
so, you know what I mean?
I do. Well, I will say this: I doubt it. I
That
have
it's
my
still a
I have my
hamburger?
doubts. I have my doubts. Oh, that's a transition to our podcast today. Doubts. Dealing with doubt. And the question we want to toss around is this: is doubt a sin, or is it just a human weakness, or is it both? And that's a big, broad question. We have some thoughts. Brian has some thoughts, so it'll be interesting to talk about it. Brian, you want to begin with etymology, or you want to begin?
Yeah, I mean,
else?
I can, but so the difficulty that I have with the question is that, like, sometimes there's, you know, a clear Greek or Hebrew word, or categories of Greek and Hebrew words, and there kind of is for the New Testament, but in my opinion, there's not really anyone for the Old Testament. And so, where meaning that, like, there are some words like sin that you're going to find used in every Bible translation, and you know, those correspond to like 3 or 4 words in Hebrew, and the concept is very easy to kind of get your teeth around. But the word doubt is not a word that you're going to find uniformly across the translations. And so
Now, Old Testament or New? You're talking about?
well, I would contend that there's not really any words in the Old Testament. And so
Yeah,
in my quick search of the Old Testament, of course, you know, given a particular translation, you can find the word doubt in the Old Testament, but it's part of like an idiomatic expression. And so one of the examples is and again, this is an English translation. So in the ESV, you have Jacob talking about when his sons bring him Joseph's bloody coat that they're trying to deceive their father quite cleverly, because they don't actually ever say anything. All they do is they take Joseph's coat, they rip it up, and they cover it in blood, and then they bring it to their father and they say, "We found this," and they allow their father to make his own conclusions, which is like another level of deception. But anyway, so Jacob concludes that his son was caught by a wild beast and torn, and then there's some little phrase about "I doubt he is alive" or something, and that's an idiomatic translation, but it doesn't really correspond to you know, a particular Hebrew word. It's just a way that we phrase it. And so, like, in English, when we use the word doubt, it generally has to do with our opinions about a thing that we're not 100% sure. And so,
Can I just, and then you go on, can I just inject one verse? This is an example using it in the New Testament.
yeah, but I
James-
wasn't talking about the New Testament. I was
I
talking
know.
about the Old
I
Testament.
know, but you'll get to it. James chapter 1.
Well, yeah, I know, but you're jumping the gun in terms of my
Okay.
thought
All
process.
right, go ahead. Tell me when it's appropriate.
Yeah, so I guess it's as good a time as any to talk about the New Testament. There are two words that more or less correspond to the word doubt, but they're not used very often. So there's distazo, or yeah, I think that's it. And then there's also diacrino. And both distazos may be only used 2 or 3 times, and diacrinos may be used about maybe 14 times. So it shows up in the participle, i.e. the adjectival or substantive form. So the doubter would be the diacrinomenos or something, and the the one who doubts or something like that. That form shows up, and then it's often paired with the verb as well. And so
Okay.
so you can now use the James
chapter 1,
example, which
yeah.
is a good example of using the participle and the verb together.
Okay, you take it from here, but this is what James says at the beginning of his letter. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, it'll be given him. Then he says this, but let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways.
Yeah. So that's an example of where the participle is used second and the verb is used first. So basic Greek grammar, if you know it, great. If you don't worry about it too much. But in terms of how lexicographers, people that makes dictionaries, they would count those the same way, just in terms of the formation, whether that's right or wrong. It's the system that we came up with. So in terms of the Strong's number for both of those, they're going to be the same, and whatever the number is, it doesn't matter. So again, if you know, you know. If you don't worry about it. So anyway, so as far as the English word, it's kind of an interesting example because it's one of those, like it has the B in it, but interestingly enough, we borrowed it, by which I mean people, the English language borrowed it from the French, du terre, and it didn't have a B in it in French, but the literary snobs who were writing for other literary snobs in the 16th century knew that it came from a Latin word, dubitare, and so they added the B back in, even though it was not pronounced it was never pronounced in English, and it was never pronounced in French. But they were saying, "Oh, we're so clever. We know the origin of this word is Latin," and so they added the B back in, and they did the same thing with debt. Again, that's a similar sounding word, debitare. And so they added this B that was never there back in. So anyway, so if you watch videos about why are there extra letters in the English language, both of those are classic examples of that word, which really has nothing to do with the definition, but it does sort of help you in terms of etymology. And so the word doubt, as far as I can tell, is that it's generally used in certain constructions, and Greg used one of those constructions where he was estimating, a particular value, truth value about which is subjective, right? When you use the word, I doubt that is true or something, and so that, I mean, I think as far as this is that, like, it would mean something like I'm 60% 70% sure that's not true, or something like that is what if you had to translate what you were saying or say it in a different way, I think you would agree that's what it means.
Yeah, and diacrino is literally judging through, like you're separating two things. You're always in between two opinions about something. So
that would be a simplistic way based on just the etymology of
what
those
would be
two.
the more?
Well, I just mean that words. I mean, it's part of a broader conversation about like how we do word studies, and I've used this example before about like if I were to just take the word Super Bowl and just to analyze, based on the two lexemes that make it up, I would certainly make the wrong conclusion, because it has nothing to do with cereal bowls, nor does it have anything to do with like being big cereal bowls, And
Where did cereal bowls come from?
because if I were to do if I were to do etymology the way you just analyzed diacrino, I'm not making fun of you, but I'm talking.
It sure feels that way.
Okay,
Go ahead.
you took when Greek students learn their prepositions and prefixes, which are two sides of the same coin, you learn that dia means something like through, and then you learn learn the base word crino means to judge, but diacrino, there are some words that can take their original etymology and then become their own thing, and so. Analego, for instance, means to read. But if you were to just analyze it based on its etymology, you have ana, which means up, and you have lego, which means to speak. And so to speak up, I suppose if you were to really think about it, maybe, but you're unlikely to get to it means to read.
But dia crino meaning judge. Dia comes the preposition
means
the preposition comes from
well, it is
a noun meaning sword to separate.
No, that's not true.
I just
at all.
made that up.
Yeah, that's not true at all.
Go ahead.
Dia is a primitive preposition.
I got that part right.
What?
I got that part right. I said it was a primitive.
No, you didn't say.
I made up that there was a noun meaning sword, but go ahead. Primitive.
Like I said, I just mean there are lots of examples where if you do these sort of and again I was and sometimes guilty of this, and it's not a bad way to learn vocabulary if you think about it. But like I said, like take the English word Super Bowl has nothing to do with cereal bowls, right?
Yeah.
So if we just take the word bowl, we're going to get the wrong idea about what the Super Bowl is. It has nothing whatsoever to do with cereal.
So in the case of diacrino, give me
what
would be the right.
Well, it's not a bad start, but in my opinion, like it means more. Dia can also mean to divide,
Right.
And so I think it more has to do in this case of. Like you alluded to, of being of two mind. And diastazo is certainly like that because it's actually not dia, it's distazo. I keep adding the A in there. It comes from dis, which means two, and so it means to be divided between two opinions. And so, again, you weren't necessarily wrong, but again, it's just a pet peeve of mine about how we sometimes do word studies. And so, the late great Michael Heiser talks about, these kind of ideas of like when we do word studies and the dangers of doing them. And, I think about washing machine, and that's not as bad an example. But it's become its own concept, and so people are going to picture something different abstractly when they picture washing, and then they picture a machine. They're not necessarily going to connect the two with a washing machine, And the example that Heiser gives is like, especially in our metaphors, like when we say it's a landslide election. We're not thinking about earthquakes or landslides at all. We're thinking about the polls being completely overwhelming, like 80 to 20%.
So it's a metaphor.
Yeah, so it's a metaphor. And so it doesn't mean nothing, but it doesn't really relate to the original idea. So anyway, so that's kind of where my brain went is that like if one just says dia means through and crino,
right?
That could sort of mean something like to discern, but really it's more of like to be divided about your. You understand what I'm saying?
And not necessarily choosing, but being of two minds.
Well, right.
The way, which is what James is
Yes,
talking about.
that's absolutely the
Now,
way
let me just
James
add
is
a
using.
little feature to this, and that is I love this particular verse as an example because I just lost. Here it is. James says, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting." So, in terms of
Sure.
the
And this
things
is
that are
where-
separate, he puts it opposite, puts doubting opposite
and
faith.
this is where I want to go, because I think the
go.
the only sort of path forward is to use, like, because the lemmas are not used that often. We have to say, well, how are they used in context, and what other words which are used more often are they compared to? And so, so faith is the word to which I think it all boils down. And if we use it as a working definition of doubt is the opposite of faith, then I think we can make some progress.
So,
But the difficulty that I'm having is that's not quite how we use the word in English. And so,
so is doubt sin? Because if you
Well,
have an answer to that, we
well,
can end the podcast early.
well, right. So like I said, if I prescribe the meaning to just referring to unbelief, then I could say yes, that is a sin. But if I just sort of say, like, how we use it kind of in popular usage, that's sort of where I have a difficulty.
Yeah.
So that's why I was having a hard time, and I still have a hard time in terms. So just, to break the fourth wall a little bit, like Greg has written up a Google Doc that he has taken notes on and put various articles on, and in this particular case, I haven't really prepped. Anyway, it's bad on me, but anyway. So he has found some articles, and the difficulty that I have with the particular articles is that again, I don't know the background, but the article is written at the popular level, and so it's written to laymen who are not experts, and so the examples that they give are countering a particular claim of another book. And the other book or article was saying that Jesus doubted, and then he's countering that. But like I said, none of them. And so the article, the main article that Greg cited, which I can't remember his name. What's this guy's name?
Oh, I can't remember. I don't think anybody would know anyway.
Well, anyway, he writes. He's a professor at in Louisville at Southern Baptist. I hadn't heard of him, but anyway, like I said, he's countering this other thing that's saying that Jesus, as part of his humanity, doubted. And again, I think the difficulty is that, like, in terms of popular language, that could be said. But if we're going to use technical language in terms of how the New Testament uses it, this other guy comes back and refutes that point. But again, the article is not done in a technical way. So in my opinion, I'm still kind of undecided about it, just because the English word doubt has a lot more nuance than how it seems to be used in the New Testament. And the other thing is Greg also came up with a list of people that doubted, and in his list, I think all of them are questionable in either case. The list he came up with was Eve, Moses, Gideon, Sarah. So it's not chronological order, and then Thomas. Right?
And yes. Just before we get to those examples, we're going to start to kind of go down the list. Are we going to start to go down that list?
Yeah.
Because just before we do, one other verse, Matthew 28:17. After receiving the Great Commission, Matthew comments, they worshipped him, talking about the disciples, but some doubted. And this writer from Desiring God, his name is John Bloom, says that the Greek word translated doubt here is distazo, not diakrino, but distazo, often refers to a wavering, hesitant uncertainty, which is kind of what you were describing, Ryan.
That one's a little more clear.
A general lack of confidence. And then he says this, what made some of the disciples waver on that Galilee mountain? Matthew doesn't tell us, which is the Lord's mercy. He goes on to say that there are different kinds of doubt, which is basically what you were saying, you know.
Yeah, and that's why that's more it's more an artifact of the English language than it is of the Greek. Is kind of my whole contention. And so just what I have open here is so Matthew's account of Peter walking on water and then Peter falling down, and he calls out and said, Lord, save me. And then, Jesus immediately, takes him by the hand. And then he uses this compound word, little faith, ogopiste. Then he asks him a question, idistasis, why did you doubt? So we have the verb form of this word. But again, I don't think most of us would have gone near so far as Peter. Yeah. My reaction, when Jesus is, walking on the water in the middle of a storm, is not to walk out on the water.
Yeah, so I'm like cheering Peter on. Wow, what an example!
Yeah. So again, my contention with the whole premise is taking each example, and does God meet the people where they're at, and that's why I have difficulty calling it sin. And so, and again, I'm not necessarily interested in stealing or straw manning particular positions, but the one thing that I think I can say clearly is we have dogmatically asserted that Jesus never sinned. I don't think that's controversial among actual Christians, and so So I think a better example is to think of a word that in Greek has both positive and negative connotations, and that is parazo. And same with the Hebrew correspondent, which is nasa, and it can mean to test, which is a positive thing, but it can also mean to tempt. And so we do have that distinction in English, but that distinction is not there in Greek. And so one of the apostles asserts that Jesus was like us in every way. He was tested in every way, and yet did not sin. And so, like in James, it'll use the word in both senses. It says let no one say that God is tempting him. But the problem is it's the same word. So again, you have to contextually figure out, is it correspond to the temptation, a negative thing, what a temptation God doesn't tempt people is the point, whereas Satan...
Tell us how this relates, using test and tempt, to doubt.
Because I think again, my contention that I said off the air before we started is that doubting, in my mind, is something that's in the mind and the heart, which is the same word in Hebrew, so we don't need to split hairs about that. And it leads to an action. And so there has to be a point of which, when does, temptation becomes sin? Because Jesus was in every way tempted, but did not sin. So that's sort of...
Are you saying there's the same kind of a parallel?
I would.
When does doubting become sin?
Well, and that's what my question kind of is. Okay. If I had to take a position, which I don't really want to do, but if you forced me to take a position, there would be a temptation to doubt, and then doubt would be the action in the mind which you would take of unbelief, and if we use this prescribed definition of unbelief to be equivalent to doubt, which I think is how the New Testament uses it, then that would become a sin, and it would lead to apostasy ultimately. And so I guess now is the matter to take each case.
Yeah.
And I'll go in reverse, just because we have a phrase, and I think it's even in popular usage, maybe not as much, but a doubting Thomas, and the problem is with this story is, and again, did you cite John is in the notes? Because that's what I have. I have John 20.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I was going to say, summarize the story of.
yeah, so in John 20, we have John's recounting of the resurrection of Jesus, and we have a slow revelation, and so he dies, he's buried, he's in the tomb, and I don't want to get into dating of like, did he die Friday night or Saturday or Thursday night, but either case, it's clear that Sunday morning, women went to the tomb and they found the tomb empty, and then Mary goes back, and that may be recounted in John, and then I think then she runs, except by the one Jesus loved, and so he said Peter and the other disciple ran there, but the other disciple was faster or something like that. And in either case, the tomb is gone. The tomb is empty and Jesus isn't there. And then slowly he appears to the disciples, and this is all in chapter 20. And so he appears to the disciples in a locked room, and for whatever reason, Thomas isn't there. Just a comment, Thomas's name is the Aramaic word that means twin. And so sometimes you hear the word didymus, which is just the Greek word for twin. And then the Latin corresponding word to that would be Gemini.
We get our English word ditto.
We do, yes.
We do. I was just a guess.
Well, I'm pretty sure we do.
It would make sense.
Yeah. In either case, we've stuck on the Aramaic form, probably because we have the English name Thomas, not the English name Didymus. So, but both are there in the text, and it alternates between them. So, anyway, so independent of that, it's not even clear like what did Thomas look like another one of the disciples. We're just not told.
I'm just seeing now, Brian. I'm just seeing now that Thomas's first doubt was of the report of his fellow disciples, obviously not of Jesus, because he wasn't there in the room.
Right.
So that adds a little bit of a layer to the doubting Thomas, who's become this figure.
Sure, and the other thing is that, like, then he makes his famous proclamation of, like, not only.
Well, walk us through it. Get to the proclamation.
So he.
So verse 24.
So first started Thomas, who was one of the 12, who was also called Didymus. So, and again, I just went through that whole thing. The other disciples who were there say, "We have seen the Lord." And then he answered them, "If I don't see his hands with the marks of the nails, or put my finger into the marks of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I won't believe."
Now, that seems to me to be very reasonable.
I think so too, and I don't think that anybody else who had seen someone died, and buried, would really conclude otherwise. Especially because again, we don't need to get it, and it might be a good thing to talk about for Easter. But one of the things is like what makes Jesus different from John the Baptist, and because the parallels are extremely striking, and one of the things is that the disciples of John, John was not resurrected, and it didn't occur to the disciples because they already could honor his memory and believe that he was going to be in the resurrection, and in other words, that he was going to live again anyway. And so it just doesn't make sense for the disciples to concoct the story out of whole cloth of stealing his body and things like that, because Jesus already would have been honored as a prophet. And so the point is that, like, yes, the disciples had seen Jesus raise people from the dead, but that's a very different thing from raising yourself from the dead.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is that he's not, like you pointed out, he's not necessarily disbelieving in Jesus, but he's disbelieving the report of other people. And so, and again, really, where I want to go is that Jesus doesn't scold Thomas for this at all. So we go down to
And just before you go, two things make this, to my mind, being reasonable doubt. One is that, as you said, it's a secondhand report. It's not Jesus saying it or God, saying it directly. It's the report of his disciples, of his fellow disciples. The other thing that's reasonable is that he insists on seeing. I mean, we think that's a good thing. We want to go to Jesus. We believe in Jesus, his testimony. And he's just simply saying, unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, place, he saw him die. I mean, I think it's very reasonable. Go ahead.
yeah. So 8 days later,
Verse 26.
yeah, Thomas is with them, and the doors are shut, or probably means locked. And then Jesus just appears in the middle, and then Jesus pulls the old angel thing, like, don't be afraid. He says, "Peace be with you."
Yeah, right.
Which I'm not sure that I necessarily, like, if someone just appeared in the middle of the night. And the other thing that is that, like, the disciples most certainly believed in ghosts and spirits, and so one of the weird things that C.S. Lewis points out is that, like, if the disciples were inventing, this out of a whole cloth, like, there's a well-established literary genre of ghosts, and the main thing about ghosts is that they're incorporeal, in as much as you can't touch them, and they most certainly can't eat food. And I don't know that Jesus eats food in this particular place, but he does eat food elsewhere, but yet he still seemingly walks through walls. So it's a very odd ghost story. Just to put it in terms of a literary genre. And so there's something very different going on here. And so anyway, so Jesus appears. He says, "Peace to all of you," and then he says to Thomas, "Bring your finger. Here are my hands, and bring your hand and put it in my side." And then this is what he says. He says, "Don't." But don't be unbelieving, but believe. It's a little bit difficult to translate. And then immediately, well, I'm adding immediately, and Thomas answered him and said, "My Lord and my God." And then Jesus responds to him, "Therefore, because you have seen me and believe, but blessed are those who have not seen."
All right, not exactly a rebuke, but kind of a little rebuke of the quality of his faith.
Sure, but the real point that I want to make is, it's two things. First of all, the word doubting doesn't occur in this passage. It's unbelief. And so that's why I think that's a good working definition. It's because we have unbelief, which is apistos, in contradistinction to pistos, which means to believe. And so, like I said, I don't know that the story is recorded in the other gospels. If it is,
I don't think it is.
yeah, um, you know, can be corrected. But anyway, the point is that nowhere is the word doubt used applying to Thomas, and yet that's the word that we decided on. Um, but in either case, and this is what I wanted to talk about with all the examples that Greg had come up with, um, is that if the person is dealing with God, he generally just meets them where they're at. Um, and so the only example that Greg gave that the person is not dealing with God is Eve, and she's dealing with the serpent.
Okay, just before you get to Eve, one final thing about Thomas. At the very end, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. I think that's pretty important because every successive generation after Thomas would be required to believe in something they've not seen. We can't put our hand into his side or finger. Of course, we have the Holy Spirit, but I think Jesus was making that statement, really pointing us to what real faith is.
Well, and the other thing that I want to point out literarily is, I feel comfortable using this word inclusio because Nick used it from the pulpit this morning. And so when um, when John is introducing the disciples in chapter 1, we have this story of Nathaniel and Philip. And Nathaniel is probably the same as Bartholomew, but Philip, meets Jesus along with Philip. I think was one of John the Baptist disciples. But anyway, they have the Messiah interaction, and then Philip goes and finds Nathaniel and said, "We found the Messiah." And then you know Nathaniel's under the fig tree and he says, Jesus from Nazareth. Nothing comes from Nazareth. And, I don't think it's a bad interpretation to say, that's the sticks, can anything good, come from this podunk town? I don't think that's a bad translation of what he's saying. And then, anyway, Philip's like, well, come and see. And, then, Jesus meets Nathaniel and he says, "Behold, an Israelite in whose there's nothing false." And Nathaniel asked him, "How do you know me?" And he said, "Well, I saw you under the fig tree, well, Philip." And then he said, "Rabbi," which literally means big man, but John glosses it as teacher. And then Jesus says, "You believe because I saw you on the fig tree. Blessed are those who have not heard," or I don't know what word. I have to look it up. But it's an inclusio of this passage. Blessed are those who have seen and yet believed. And so literarily there's an inclusio of that we have you know the whole kind of book is bookended. And one of the things uh, in scholarship is just that, like, there seems to be like two endings of John. And it's I have no problem with John himself writing the ending, but it does seem like he added it later. And so John, the book kind of ends with what we call chapter 20, and it has a little summary about why did John write this book, and it talks about I wrote this so that you would believe in the signs. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, I have cherry picked particular examples
Yeah.
because and then he makes this sort of
In order that we might.
in order that you might believe. But like, if every story was told about Jesus, I don't suppose all the books in all the world would hold the record. But then in John 21, we have a story about the disciples going back to fish and the restoration of Peter. And so I don't I don't want to go so far as to say it's not authentically Johannine, but I do certainly want to point out that, like, it was a later addition because it seems like John was done.
Duly noted. You said we were going to you were going to start at the end of the list that I gave you. So let's go back to the very beginning and let's touch on Eve.
Sure. So the verse, and again, I'm just going by the document that Greg wrote. So in the document, he gives verse citations, and so he says verse 1 through 6, in chapter 3 of Genesis. And so we have a story here of the serpent, and it doesn't actually say Satan anywhere in the narrative. So that's later understanding, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it in the narrative. It just says Nahash, meaning serpent. So anyway, the you know all is not good in the garden, because the serpent, and there's so many questions around it, of like, why didn't Eve freak out when a serpent's talking to her. That's just, these things are just not addressed. And again, there are good answers, but we have to go outside the Bible to find them, because frankly the text just doesn't talk about them. So the serpent tempts Eve, and it seems one of the so he said, did God really say? And so fundamentally, the Nahash, or the serpent's temptation to Eve is disbelieving in the character of God. And the other thing is that, like, we have to do some little bit of guessing, but when Eve recites the commandment, or the prohibition, which is just a negative commandment, back, she doesn't get it quite right, and we're not sure, why that is. Was that something that Adam had added to? So what Eve said. So what God told Adam is, do not eat from the knowledge of good and bad. That's really a better translation than good and evil. But
Well, I know you know this, but just for context, God actually began by saying, "You can eat of any tree of the garden, but of," except he gave one exception.
yeah,
So it's pretty clear.
yeah.
And when you
No, but
said,
the point that I'm making, God didn't say don't touch it. But when Eve recites the prohibition
yeah,
back to the serpent,
right.
she adds an additional prohibition of, you shall not eat of it, nor shall you touch it. And that's not there in the original commandment. And so what's not clear, and different people have speculated on this, about, like, did God tell Adam, and then it was Adam's job to tell Eve, and then the two of them, or Adam added an extra layer, and this is what the rabbis call, and the rabbis thought this was a good thing, of building the fence around the law, of like, well, the law is this, but if we build the fence around the law, then we're not even gonna, and so the rabbinic Judaism, which is there was lots of sects in Judaism in Jesus' day. Rabbinic Judaism is
That's not SEX. There's probably a lot of that too, but you're talking about SECTS.
sect.
Sects. Can I take issue with one thing that you have said and you will say about this situation with Eve? You've made the point that Eve was doubting, it was dealing with the serpent, not with God. But really, in our definition of doubt, which is, being of two minds, she was really dealing with what the serpent was telling her and what God had already told her, even though she got it wrong in the rehash. So, I mean, I think
No,
she's
no,
really
yeah, but
dealing with
I
God.
haven't finished expositing.
All right, I'm just
I,
putting you on notice. I have a problem with that.
okay, but I haven't finished saying what I'm saying.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's like when people, like, say, like Hitler said, kill Jews, and then someone just clips kill Jews. You know what I mean? Like,
No, I don't know what you mean. I mean, I know what you mean, but that doesn't even apply. Just go ahead, Brian. Get to where you're going to go.
it gets so hard to talk when you interrupt me. I want to take a digression and talk about.
This is Brian Collins Unleashed.
So
So go.
in learning about myself and how God made me, like, it seems to me that my brain works differently from other people, and I can't prove any of this, in as much as I have yet to, and whether I ever will, have an fMRI and see whether different parts of my brain are firing different than is typical. Um, fMRI isn't that old. It's maybe
What does that stand for?
functional magnetic resonant imaging. So in other words, it's an MRI is able. What it does is it polarizes the hydrogen atoms, the spin in the hydrogen atoms in the water, which is throughout the body, and then it watches the decoherence. So in other words, it's an excellent way to map. Things in the body that other tools would not be able to do. And so it's one of the best ways we have. So X-rays are good so far as looking at bones, but they see through organs, right? But MRIs look at the water in the body, and the water is more or less everywhere. And so you can take slices of like looking at different parts. And so anyway, F stands for functional magnetic resonant imaging. And so the point is that you can do it on the brain, and the people are conscious when you're doing this, and so you can ask them questions and talk to them, and then look at how the neurons in the brain are firing. And so the language that they've come up with in psychology and neuroscience is neurotypical and neurodivergent. And so people who are on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, are neurodivergent, and all that means is that different parts of their brain fire differently than a neurotypical person. And so,
Okay, bring it back.
in learning about myself, I think that, and my counselor agrees with me that I have high functioning autism, and so certain things that are not obvious to me, that I assume are obvious to other people. Because I'm often punished for it, but there are certain trade-offs in as much as that, like, I sometimes make connections that other people don't, and so I think that the difficulty is that my brain is jumping over in all these non-linear ways, and that's not the way. Or again, I'm speculating that's not the way your brain works. So
Oh, that's the opposite of the way my brain, to a fault. Very linear.
So I'm making connections all over the place, and you're having a hard time following. And so, anyway, I personally, I don't really see it as a blessing. Alienated from everybody else, and it's just like, well, like, this is just how my brain works. So
Just speaking for myself, just one person. I love it because it's like taking a wild ride in an amusement park. It's not only entertaining, but in this case, it's an informative. So, go ahead with Eve.
well, anyway, but the difficulty is that, like, when I'm interrupted in the train of thought, I lose where
I
was
see what
going.
you're getting at.
No, I'm not.
Well, can you get back on track with Eve and
Yeah. So anyway, like I said, the rabbis saw it as a good thing to build a fence around the law. And I don't remember which tractate it is, but they explicitly say that in, like, chapter 1, verse 1, about that it being a very good thing to build a fence around the law. And sometimes they even built a fence around the fence, and you see that in Jesus's interactions with different people. And so anyway, the reason that I'm belaboring this point so hard is because, like, the serpent uses that to his advantage, because um, you know um, God said, "Do not eat of it, lest you surely die," and the serpent knows that just touching it isn't going to cause Eve to die. So in fact, she does the experiment. She touches the tree and she doesn't die. And so this is where the danger of building a fence around the law is that, like, you can do the experiment of building the fence around the law and nothing bad happens.
yeah?
And so it's sort of like, and again, you know we don't have quite as simple a prohibition as, not eating from a particular tree, but the Christians perennially build fences around the law. And when I grew up, in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Like one of the things was you could only listen to Christian music. And, there was plenty of artists of different genres. But by that point, in the 70s, from what I've heard, like there was much more you can only listen to, these bands, and you definitely can't listen to rock and roll because that leads to
Yeah.
all kinds of other things. And then you get the Satanic Panic and the rest of it. And and it's in my mind, it's sort of a question of like, is it a gateway drug, or and that's I think that's where most people landed. But the problem is that like uh, I think some people can listen to music in faith, and it not be a sin. And so in my mind, it's meat sacrificed to idols. And so, Paul said, if in one sense, um, there is no idol, in as much as the physical manifestation of it is nothing. Yeah, there may be something supernatural behind it, but the meat itself is neutral, and like it doesn't matter whether it was sacrificed to an idol or not. God created it, so you can eat it in faith, or at least the enlightened believer can eat it in faith. But those that came out of the pagan culture, that the demons are still very real thing. And again, my contention is that there is supernatural beings behind it, but Christ has conquered them. But for the sake of the person who is tempted to fall back in that, don't do that. And so similarly, like I think that like, if a group of friends is going to go somewhere and one of them is an alcoholic, you don't go to the bar. That would be, a temptation for the non-alcoholic. But the other way is that, as C.S. Lewis points out, is that like some people are completely controlled in their things, but use their control to look down on other people's. And so, or they say, if I can't have it, nobody can have it. And so, I think there's a temptation in the church to say, well, if I can't drink alcohol, nobody can drink alcohol. But that's not the attitude we have in Scripture, because Jesus Himself makes wine. Right?
Okay, at the risk of
I know that
putting you off track,
I know that I'm off topic.
Eve, I want to know what you're thinking about Eve. Whether she
My real contention is that she wasn't doubting with God; she was doubting with the serpent. That's what my whole contention. And we would probably have to go through every single circumstance of, but in the 5 examples that you gave, all of them, with the exception of Eve, had to do with the person dealing with God directly. And God meets them where they're at every single time.
well, in every other case, including Thomas, don't you think though that in the background there was the struggle with the devil,
sure,
even though
sure, but the question is, did God punish them for it?
right?
That's
Separate question, I think, but an important one.
That's what my kind of contention is. And I think the difficulty is just that, like, in all the examples, the people are dealing with a physical manifestation of God. And so but that's, for most of us, that is not the case. We're not exactly on our own because we have the Holy Spirit, but it's not exactly like we have the physical presence of Jesus standing next to us either.
Yeah.
And so, and also, like, whatever the serpent is, he was in some sense corporeal. And like God certainly did have theophanies and did interact with Adam and Eve in sort of a physical way, because later in the very chapter, God shows up in some sense. It talks. I mean, again, we're using anthropological language, but it says he walks in the garden and he talks to them. And and the other examples, we have various Christophanies. Gideon certainly is a Christophany. I Sarah may just be a proper theophany. Moses is a proper theophany. And obviously Thomas is dealing with the incarnate Jesus.
Yeah.
So anyway, so like I said, my entire my entire contention is about there's a difference between wrestling with God and that's Israel wrestles
Mhm.
this very strange
Very strange
theophonic
story.
thing, and like he's physically wrestling with him, um, and they're wrestling all night, and for some reason, like God can't
Gives up.
overcome, and like it's an extremely strange story, but uh, Jacob, says, bless me, and what one of the things that the theophany or the angel or God says is no longer will you be called Jacob, which means deceiver or grabber, or it literally means ankle, but figuratively it means deceiver or grabber of the ankle. But he said you'll be called Yisrael, which wrestler of, with we have to kind of supply, but with God or striver with God, and obviously there's a purposeful pun in as much as like he physically wrestled with God, but more importantly is that like he spent his entire life sneaking around like and doing one over on people, and yet God still blesses him. And the irony is he goes to his uncle, and in good family tradition the trickster is tricked by his uncle.
Yeah.
And but
Isn't that a good picture though? That picture of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Isn't that a good picture of the people who wrestle with doubt?
well
Maybe.
that's what my why I brought it up
Yeah.
is that like in the examples that you give, they are wrestling with God. And that's why I think that doubt is fundamentally a thing within the heart or the mind, which again, as I said, is the same word in Hebrew, so we don't need to split hairs over that. Lev or leva, for those that care. Um, uh, yeah. So chronologically, we have Sarah, and Sarah was 90 years old. Her husband's 99, and it's hard to know, given that people live longer, like, does that really, like, could you kind of divide by two, like, you know, and say, well, like, if Abraham lived to 200, and like, is that the same as 100? And again, I don't really want to answer those kinds of questions, but in either case, the text is clear that her menstrual cycle had stopped. It
Okay. Give the context for that
well,
that
anyway, so
story.
God had promised uh, Abram at the time, that he would bear a son. Then seemingly God is kind of silent. So the two of them are like, well, what are we doing? And then Sarah gives her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, which literally means the foreigner, to Abram. And then has a son through him named Ishmael, which means he hears. Um, and then God shows up. So when Ishmael's 12 or 13, um, God shows up and says, "No, Sarah is gonna have a son," and Sarah overhears this, and she laughs to herself, kind of in derision. And it's the same word. It's yitzhak, um, which can mean to laugh in derision. But it can also mean to laugh in joy. And so ultimately, the angel says, "No, you're going to have a son. I'm going to return a year from now, and you're going to have a son." And then she's laughing with joy. And so there's a literary device where they're repeating the same word, but it has different meaning depending on the context. And that's obviously the name of the son, is that he laughs.
And even though the word doubt is not used,
It's not used
it
at all.
was her laughter at the thought of what God said.
Yeah,
Promise, God's
but the
promise.
angel does rebuke her. He goes and lives in Midian, and then he's taking care of his father-in-law's sheep, and he goes up on the holy mountain. In that passage, it's called Horeb, but elsewhere it's Sinai. And he sees this very strange thing of a bush or a little scrub brush that's called Sanaa, which is purposely they used this obscure little word to echo the word Sinai. And so you see a bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. And then God is in the bush. But one of the things that you have to read the Hebrew text closely, you realize that there's also a Christophany, or the angel of the Lord, outside of the fire. So there's two Yahweh figures in the narrative. There's the Yahweh in the fire, which is the theophany proper, God appearance, and then there's the Christophany, or the angel of the Lord, the Malach Yahweh, outside the fire. And it's like both of them seem to be talking to Moses. But in either case, God tells Moses, he said, you're going to go back to Israel, and there's this back and forth, but God meets him where he's at every single time. And so, like he says, how are they going to believe me? And then there's this, weird thing about, well, stick your hand in your own cloak. It turns leprous.
I had an afterthought when I put Moses on the list, but I wonder whether that is the word doubt used anywhere?
No.
No.
No, but
isn't that a natural?
But there's not even a Hebrew word for doubt. So all your
Right. Okay. Well, I guess
together.
then the question is that really an example of doubt? Because isn't he just requesting? I know he's startled by what he says he is told his role is going to be, but he's just wanting more information and demanding it.
And even if his doubt is unreasonable, God still meets him.
Yeah, I know that's the point you've been making. Yeah,
and so,
yeah.
I think the best example of that is with Abraham. I can't remember if it's Abraham at this point, but I think it is. And so Abram, when his nephew Lot is in Sodom, which isn't actually the city's name, Sodom just means destruction. So, but that's what they chose to remember it as. And so he goes through this whole rigmarole of, what if there's 50 righteous people, then there's 45, and then 40, and then 30, and then 20, and 10. And God, I don't want to say God gives into him every time, but God meets him where he's at every single time.
He did. Yeah, I mean, God doesn't give in.
No,
I know, but what would you say? Just kind of as an aside, in that story, wouldn't you say it's more like, I don't know, mercy?
Yeah, God is going to have mercy on the city for Abraham's sake.
Right.
So whatever Abraham asks God, he will do it.
So God really does change his mind, but it's an act of mercy.
And that's another example.
Meeting him where he is. I like that.
Well, it's not original me, but
well, I still think it's a good way of thinking about.
And the quintessential example is Gideon, and like.
Why is it quintessential?
Well, because we as Christians, we use how God meets Gideon where he's at as certain touchstones in our own lives, and I'm not sure about the prudence of that. I don't know. I guess my answer is the same in as much as that, like, how did John Calvin say it, or was it Luther, that the Holy Spirit lisps for us? So I think that's sort of the case. So narratively, we have Gideon. So he's, so the Israelites, or at least Gideon's tribe of the half tribe of Manasseh, is being oppressed by these warrior raiding bands that just come in and take all the food, and everything that's not strapped down they take with them. And so Gideon is in a pit threshing wheat, and you don't thresh wheat in a pit because you need to throw the chaff and the seeds, and the wind will blow it away. So it's extremely inefficient, and us not being a farming culture, don't know the background. And so this Christophany shows up and says, "Mighty warrior of the Lord," which is almost ironic because the guy's hiding in a pit. And then Gideon, sacrifices a cow, and the angel, lights it on fire with his stick, and the whole thing's consumed. And then Gideon knocks down the statue of Baal. And so you think that that would be enough for Gideon, but it's not. And so then, the angel of the Lord disappears, comes back, and then, okay, Gideon, raise an army. And this is where, again, God meets him exactly where he's at, where Gideon says, well, I don't remember what the order is, but he said, if I lay a fleece out on the ground, a fleece meaning, the sheepskin, and think your clothes, and if you've ever had dew, like, that, if you spent the night in a tent, your tent is soaked in the morning. And so that's what Gideon's talking about. And so, and again, I could have the order wrong, but I'll put the fleece down and let the whole ground be soaked and let the fleece be dry. And God just meets him where he's at, does it, and then Gideon's like, the next night, well, now I want you to do the exact opposite. Again, the angel of the Lord just does it.
So he was putting God to the test in each case, yes?
I guess. I mean, this is the difficulty. Is it's like, the angel of the Lord never rebukes him or says that.
Well, no, but I wonder.
Nor does the author of the Judges comment on the Deuteronomic, impropriety of it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, but I wonder if it's because of the beginning of the story, which either I didn't hear you say or you just went past it, where God encounters Gideon and kind of gives him his role, what he's going to do, and Gideon's like, "What, me? I'm the least." What are his objections there? I'm the least.
Yeah,
of the least.
I'm the least in my own family.
In the smallest tribe.
My family is the smallest within our tribe.
See, now that to me, that part, the beginning of it, is more humility than doubt.
Well, and again, we just don't know, because the author of the Judges never comments on the rightness or wrongness of people actions. He just shows you through the narrative the consequences. And so the book of Judges is some of the most atrocious stories of, we got literal child sacrifice to God, with Jephthah and his daughter. And then we have this horrible thing about the Benjamites, killing, being sodomite, the woman ends up dead. And
and maybe the worst of all, God's command to Abram to sacrifice his son.
Well, I don't want to go there.
I know.
Because I just wanted to stick to, but But the point is that the author of the Judges never comments on the rightness or the wrongness of the action. And so it's hard for us to say as readers what's going on in the mind, which we're so used to in novels of being able to see into the minds and hearts of what, because motive does matter.
Yeah, and what matters too is our ability to say, we don't know, and that's okay. Now, I never use the leash, only one time, and that's usually at the end where we got to work toward a wrap. We've walked through the 5 examples. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Brian, is just to cite an article, and I would encourage anyone listening to look this up. It's an article on the Gospel Coalition site by Michael Patton. It's entitled "The 7 Ways to Deal with Doubt," because I think in the end, before we get to that, I want to walk through it quickly and have you comment on each one. But am I understanding you correctly to say that doubt is more of a slippery slope toward sin than a sin in itself?
Yeah, and again, I don't know that I have a strong opinion about it, but I would say in the terms of how we use it in English, I would have to say that.
Okay. So it's 7 ways to deal with doubt. I'll walk really quickly through these. Number 1, he says, have mercy on those who doubt. By which he says, there are some people who doubt something during the day, they have doubts. They go to sleep, they wake up the next morning, and they're fine. They're free of it. There are other people who have a lifetime of doubt, whether it's self-doubt or doubting God. So have mercy on those who doubt. 2, I don't know. I'll ask you to comment on each one, or you don't have to.
No, go. I can.
Okay,
I can
number
come
2,
back.
realize doubt is often the birth pangs of deepened faith. I love that. So sometimes doubt is a path that God provides for us, or at least is with us on, that leads to greater faith. So rather than seeing it always as the opposite of faith, sometimes it's what leads us there. Be ready to live with mystery. Okay, sometimes we don't know. God hasn't revealed it. We need to be okay with that. Number 4, I'm getting to the one that I really like, that I do want you to comment on. Number 4, make the main things the main things. Don't always be looking for those things that are not revealed, those things that are uncertain. Number 5, live according to the faith you still have. Here's the last 2. Doubt your doubts. He says, why give your doubt a courtesy you don't give your faith? In other words, is your doubt so compelling that it can't be questioned? So that's an interesting twist on it. If you're doubting something, if you have doubts, maybe rather than doubt what God has said or doubt what you think you should believe, ask yourself, is this doubt itself something that should be questioned? Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah. Are you done?
No. One last, and then you get the floor. Work through, I guess that was the main one. Work through the sin in your life. So the emphasis, rather than being upon a particular doubt, just deal with sin. Work with sin, and then you're less likely to doubt.
Yeah. So I think we maybe have to do a part 2 because I have more than 2 minutes of thoughts on this, because this is probably where I would, left alone, I would have gone this particular way, but I was just following your lead with the particular.
You're saying you would have gone in
I would have
the direction of these.
I would have approached it from this way, because
let's make that kind of the outline. We can work through those in the next episode.
yeah. So C.S. Lewis says a lot about this kind of in doubt in this context, I think, is not the opposite of faith, but rather it's sort of what C.S. Lewis calls undulation. C.S. Lewis, in the words of Screwtape, calls undulation, or the law of undulation. So C.S. Lewis, by sort of saying the opposite of what Screwtape is saying, or implying the opposite of what Screwtape says an awful lot about, like, that is often how God deepens faith. And so Screwtape is sort of telling Wormwood to do the opposite and push the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, if I had just said, what is doubt? This is the direction that I would have went, but I was just sort of following your lead in terms of the outline.
Yeah.
So, but I can't give what everything that I think about, because this is more of where I am all the time.
Well, and that's what he says. Have mercy on those who doubt, because some people deal with doubt their whole life.
Sure, and that's the difficulty that I have, in the sense of, like, the things that I'm doubting are not necessarily clear. I don't doubt that God loves me. My kind of doubts are like, okay, God, like I got this depression, and I can pray for you to take it away, and you haven't taken it away. And so I have to wrestle with that of, like, well, like there has to be some kind of purpose of which to it. And I may understand part of it. But in my mind, it's connected to the general sort of problem of pain. And that, like, in as much as that I theoretically, or not even theoretically, but I acknowledge that God can heal. But the question is, will he heal, or will he heal in the way that I want to?
Yeah.
And so again, those are much more of the kinds of things that I wrestle with. And I think the other thing is that I've been accused of unbelief by certain people, but I don't think that they're right. I think that I have been guilty of unbelief, but it's but as far as I can tell, it's never led to full apostasy. In as much as like God always is faithful, and I eventually repent. So again, I don't think the doctrine is that Christians won't suffer and that they'll always be faithful, but rather that God will compel them to repent every single time. And so that's sort of summarized in the doctrine of the perseverance, or as R.C. Sproul would have, the preservation of the saints, that God preserves the saints and allows them to persevere. Which in practice for me is these cycles of doubt, which sometimes leads to sin. But again, he always leads me to come back. But just in terms of my own personal experience, like when I'm having a good day, I forget what the bad days are like. And when I'm having a bad day, things are just black. And so it's very, on or off. And today, happens to be more on the bad side. And it doesn't mean that I'm doubting, but it just means that I'm not doing that great. But, if I stay with that, it certainly can lead to isolation and the rest of it. And so, like I said, I don't know that I can answer every single one of these. I think I'm out of time.
We can use it. That's a great example. I think doubt does deserve, dealing with doubt, another episode, and that this would be a good outline to use. You can, maybe we can talk about the ones that require a little bit more or deserve a little bit more conversation. Okay. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for tuning in. And we're going to go out with, is this the same music? Yeah. Yeah, I've determined just about three cough drops does it for an episode, with a few coughing spells in between.
So this is where my mind goes. So there's something called Reddit Confessions, or there's a subreddit called Confessions, and I don't read the thread directly, but other people go through it and find interesting.